This year, the Metrobank Girls in Cricket Fund crowned 38 winners of the Metrobank Champion of Girls Cricket Award. That's one in every county. These winners have gone above and beyond to deliver growth and sustainability for girls cricket in their areas. A huge thank you for all the work that you do to transform the game for girls. Hello and welcome to the Wisden Women's Cricket Weekly podcast. The Ashes is beginning to feel real. England have named a set of squads for the entire tour. Australia have named a group for the white ball leg of the series. We'll be getting our teeth stuck into both announcements on today's pod. I'm Yas Rana, and first you'll hear from Lauren Winfield-Hill out in Australia, and then from Katya, Witney and Ben Gardner. So this was the week of the Ashes squads. Let's start with England. I don't think there were many surprises, really. Fitness aside, it's pretty much exactly the same group that just toured South Africa. I guess the most eye-catching aspect of the squad announcement is that it's quite a big group. There are 19 players picked across formats. Head coach John Lewis has said this is in part because of the schedule. He used the word rammed, and he said that it's basically because the series has to start after Christmas and the WPL starts in February, and all the prior media commitments start a couple of weeks before that. First of all, Lauren, you spend a lot of time out in Australia. It's a really big country, and there's not a lot of time between games. And interestingly, there's no warm-up game before the Test match, which is now at the end of the series rather than the start. So actually, subtly a few changes compared to 2023. On the gap between games, what do you think the impact of that will be on the series?
Yeah, I think it's huge. I think the warm-up game is less of an issue for me because I think, the frequency of how much cricket is now played in women's cricket, obviously the England girls have just been in South Africa. A lot of players have played out here now. By the time you play international cricket, you've probably played Big Bash or a domestic season over in Australia. So that doesn't concern me quite so much. I think scheduling is grueling. And I think, when you don't realise until you're out here, just an example is like Brisbane to Sydney is like, oh yeah, it's just an hour flight, but it's probably a 5 or 6 hour travel time. By the time you've got to the airport, you've got there, you've done your flight, you've then picked up, your vehicle at the other end and got to your accommodation. So it sounds like, oh, you're just nipping around the corner, but you're really not. And there can be very long, tiring sort of afternoons or mornings. So I do think that will definitely play a part. Like you say, just the sheer volume that's in the squad from England, they're obviously thinking we'll cover all bases because, it is pretty packed. There is a lot of travel, which affects, you're sat for long periods of time, big fast bowlers backs and all that sort of stuff. Like I feel like the BCCI and the WPL and things like that is like, it's like the bully at school that everybody talks about, but nobody wants to stand up to. And, the power and the emphasis and priority that's put on the WPL, no player's going to not want to, is going to not want to go. That, money is power and that the power that they have is enormous. But it does feel like it's not as prioritized and prestigious. I think that'd be the word I would like, the rich, like prestigious nature of an Ashes series used to be so protected. It used to be, that and World Cups were the two things that you put in your calendar as an England player or an Australian and say, this is it. This is what we work so hard to be a part of. And it does feel a bit like it's like John Lewis has said, it's a bit of, oh, we'll just shove it in here and cramp it up a little bit and it'll still go ahead, but we'll just sort of ram it all in.
Do you think it feels a little bit less prestigious? I mean, it was a big move. This is the first one in a while where the women's Ashes has not been at the same time as the men's Ashes. I thought in 2023, it was a bit of a shame that the women's Ashes were happening at the same time, in that you had amazing cricket and it sort of got lost at times in what was going on in an amazing men's series at the same time. So I feel like it's a really positive move that it's at a different time and it has its own window. But at the same time, do you think because of how rammed it is, it does feel a little bit less of a thing than it has done in the past? I mean, some of those turnarounds are really sharp. 2 days between quite a few of the white ball games. And as you say, distances and travel times are not what you have in England, where there was bigger gaps between games in 2023.
Yeah, I think so. I think, if you look at the reasoning why it is that is, because of if it's because of WPL, which we're assuming it is, um, then that shows that that's less important than WPL. That's just fact. What you do, there's a lot of people say, oh, the professional athletes, they should be able to turn it around and, have a day between, get on with it. Like, yes, I completely agree. Like, it is very much a full-time job now. It's very much what we do. But with fatigue, with travel, with the more time you cram things together, you're compromising skill and venom and competition, and that's what you want it to be. Every time you walk onto the pitch, you are like ready to go head to head. Your juices are flowing. You're really ready to go hell for leather, toe to toe. And it sort of feels like, especially those ones where there's only a day in between, it's like, whoa, one's over, boom, we're in the next one. It's like, oh, right, we're out there. We better get, what are we doing? Where are we going? How are we going to throw some punches here? You're spat back out and you're playing again. So I think, it's something that we just spoke briefly about off air was as well. It's the storytelling of an Ashes and the narratives and like you made a really good point is that you want every game to be like a chapter and the Ashes to be like the narrative and the story. And it's like, well, how important can you make each chapter? How much can you tell? How much, if there's some really good performances or some really bad performances, how important can we make that chapter before we move on to the next one? Whereas, with the day in between, especially, even from a review and planning point of view, like if I'm a player and I'm sort of, all right, these are the plans that the Aussie bowlers threw at me, for example. How did I go? What am I doing? Review it, move on. It's even just things like that. You don't really, you're properly thrown into the mixer, and you won't really get a chance to sort of recuperate, review, and go again.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think that series benefit and tournaments benefit so much when there's time to let a narrative fester, especially because you want to get casual fans in. Like your hardcore fans will watch it and they'll consume every bit of content around the series that's going. But for the casual fans to get involved, I do think you do need a little bit of time. I used the example before we start recording. Like, let's say Maya Boucher scores 120 in the first ODI. You want people to like properly let that sink in and people talk about that for a few days. You don't want to go straight to the next game. I had a question for you actually, because for the difference between the 2023 Ashes in terms of turnaround time to this one, for me, I just, I turn on my laptop and then turn off my laptop when I'm watching a game. But if you're a player involved in a series, what's the difference between, let's say you have a game on a Saturday in London and then your next game's on Wednesday in Birmingham, so you got like a 3-4 day turnaround and the distance isn't too far, compared to a flight in Australia when there's only a 48-hour turnaround between games? Like, as a player, what are you doing differently in that time gap when it's
Yeah,
2 days
yeah.
compared to 4?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And the first thing that springs to our mind is like decompress. So you've got your first sort of rest day where it's literally like, just have a bit of decompress, switch off, see friends and family, whatever. Let your body like do all your recovery, all the boring stuff. And then you've got preparation, like you've actually got a chance. So if Megan Shoot's been blowing off your front pad in the first game, then you go, right, well, I'm gonna just nail 20 on drives, and you've got preparation and refocus to then come back. You've got chance to problem solve, I think, as a player in that time, where you've got chance to rectify a few things or a couple of things that worked really well, like just going either think about that or emphasize that in your training and preparation. I think it becomes really difficult when I think of players is 5 to 8 batters who might not play a lot, might not have huge. You look at in the T20s or the white ball stuff, they might not get a lot of time in the middle. You think of somebody like, potentially even an Amy Jones. She might get a lot of time in the middle, but she might not. So then you're going like 3 or 4 days, 5 days, 6 days, without barely hitting a ball, because you're in this like real conundrum where I know like I've been in that situation before where I'm sort of batting like 5, 6, 7 and in an Ashes series where you're sort of like, well, I haven't really hit many balls in the middle. But if I train tomorrow, I've literally got 5 days off with no, I've got 5 days where I'm on deck every day and I'm in cricket mode every day. So it just gives you an opportunity to decompress and go again. Whereas the day in between, the day will probably play out where you get up, you pack your stuff, you're traveling. It's a pretty long day traveling. You'll get to the hotel at the other side. You'll probably have a recovery session, have dinner, go to bed, and you're doing it all over again. So you can sort of see there how it's. I mean, yes, they want Ashes to be intense, and that does, in my opinion, really amplify the intensity because there is no escape, there's no respite, there's no decompression. It is once you're in it until the last ball is sort of bowled. So yeah, that's probably the main differences really. But like I say, the ones that I really think of is the people that maybe don't do a lot of heavy lifting in the game, but tell you that when it really matters and there's a game on the line, those are the people that will be, you'll be forfeit in a game that's really important, that holds the most pressure on it, so you lose more wickets. And those are the players that will be expected to win the game. And they may have gone 5 days without barely hitting a ball.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the most interesting things is how short the series is. It's just 3 weeks from the first day to the last day, which is, that's over and done with very, very quickly. The other big difference between 24, 25 and 2023 is that there's no warm-up game for the test match. So the test match in 2023 was at the start of the series. This time round, it's the end of the series. And there's a whole separate conversation about one team will know that a draw is enough for them to either retain or regain the Ashes going into the test match. And it's a 4-day test match in 2025. It was a 5-day test match. And we needed the 5th day in 2023. But also, you had those 2 warm-up games in 2023. Tammy Beaumont scores a double 100 for England against Australia A. And you put some miles into the legs of the Australia team. You scored 100 for England A against Australia. I know that England recently played a test match in South Africa, but the conditions are different. The type of players you're playing are different. It does feel like, given that there isn't a domestic red ball system, players don't play a lot of red ball cricket. It feels to me like that's quite a big deal not to have a red ball warm-up game.
I think the biggest deal is that the Aussies aren't going to help us out in it. That is, I think that them not putting a warm-up game on is saying you're on your own here. We're not helping you prepare. We're not going out of our way. That's how I would interpret it. There's a whole heap of domestic players that are over here now playing domestic cricket that could easily put together an Australian A, team to play against England. Whether England have said they don't want one or whether the Australians have said, well, we're not putting one on for you. The flip side of it is there is slightly more test cricket played than there used to be. Yeah, it's still not a truckload. England have just come off playing a test match against South Africa. So it's not it's not too distant where they've played test cricket. And, you'd pretty much, if you were going to play a warm game, you'd have had to do it on Christmas Day, probably. Looking at you're looking at the period of when the players would actually have to be here to play it to sort of fit in with this, the start of the Ashes. But I just think it's the Australians saying, you're on your own. Why should we look after you? The whole thing is that the minute they arrive, it's trying to create discomfort. Like I remember when I played against the Aussies in that England A game and I captained that side. And I was like, this is not a warm-up game, I'll tell you now. We are not here to warm up the Aussies. And everyone was like, oh, all right. I said, I'm not spending 4 days warming up Australians. I don't know about you. Like, we're here to throw some punches and tell them that you're on our patch. And even if we're only an A team, we're not here to come and give you half volley. So I think, yeah, it's an interesting one, but it's obviously they're showing that they're not going out of their way to try and help England out or overly prepare them for what's to come.
I mean, Yeah, I was just re-looking at that scorecard of that game between Australia and England A. You very nearly won that game by an innings.
Yeah, and and honestly, like I remember just like the in the warm up and stuff, and um, I just spoke to the group, and that was literally it. There was probably a few F bombs in there as well because I was pretty like, it's not a warm up game. Like, why the hell should we warm up the Australian team to then go and feed them into the wild against our girls? No way. So I think that's how an Ashes series should be, is the minute you arrive, you're on our patch, and we're here to, to battle it out. And that's how it always used to be and used to feel. And I think, you want to create that real it's a battle, isn't it? And it's prestigious, and it's all these things that we've spoken about, and that's how it should be.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a famous story about there's a men's Ashes tour 20 odd years ago that NASA captained, and England rocked up in a game, I think it was against Queensland, and they had a bowl first, and Queensland scored 600, and England were like, shit. we're in for a difficult series here.
Yeah, yeah.
I think it's quite interesting if you take a step back and look at the bigger picture, that women's cricket in the UK in particular has moved forward so far in the last 5 years. But the structure of the Ashes is, although it's standalone this time round, is broadly quite similar to what it has been for quite a long time. If you were the head honcho of Ashes cricket and you had free reign over what the structure looked like in 4 years' time, etc., how would you revamp it?
I think you've got to have a real clear like purpose and vision of what your Ashes actually is. Like, do you want it to be like what's the format that means the most? Like, are we putting more emphasis on test cricket now that we play slightly more test cricket? Do you have 3 test matches and make it longer? Make it 3-3-3. I think that would be great. I think that, yeah, it'd be long, but my gosh, if you look at the things that we've sort of spoken about, is the narrative playing out like it is like blood, sweat, and tears drawn out over a longer period of time. Every series, you can do it where every format is like a series. Rather than, the test match still just feels a real like, oh yeah, we'll throw that in there because that's tradition. I think even in like, I don't know, was it 2013, 14, one of my first Ashes series, the format was the same. All they've done is just rejigged where they put the test match. I think you could do that. I think players would love that. Like three test matches, 3 ODIs, 3 T20s, let's go to war. And yeah, it makes it longer, but it's like that makes it like that real, like, it's so different to anything else you'll play. It's such a big part of your calendar. Like, and I think that's what you want to create. Like, you can't forget that, you know, both teams have just come like thrown off the back of a T20 World Cup. Whether you like it or not, the WPL is coming up, and that's as important as international cricket nowadays. And it's sort of like wedged in the middle of these two really important things in the calendar. Whereas if you make it, if the vision and the purpose is like heritage, hell for leather, go to battle, like this should be in my opinion, it should be way tougher than a World Cup, because it is two of the best teams going head to head for longer. We've spoken about in the World Cup is you sort of get two or three free passes and then you're in the semis, and you're sort of then having to play proper hard fought cricket. Whereas in Ashes, every game is hard fought. So I think that would be cool. I think, you can add more, that you can add another test element into it, whether you go 2 or 3. 3 seems right because you've got 3 of the others, and that narrative and that storytelling and like we've spoken a lot about the Ashes, is half of it's the media circus. Like, imagine drawing it out even longer with the media circus. Like, it just makes it red hot. So it is an interesting, yeah, like you say, like what, 10 years ago, my first Ashes, and not a lot's changed, which is crazy when you think about the evolution of the game around that.
Yeah. It's not a hugely surprising peek behind the curtain, but people in the media need to have things to talk about. So
Yeah, yeah,
if you have less cricket, right, you make a bigger deal of the little cricket that you've had,
yeah,
and you
yeah, yeah.
spend
That's
more
true.
time on
Yeah,
it, etc. Whereas if you got loads of it, even literally talking about our show, right? I'm just imagining what it's going to be like during the Ashes. If you've got 3 ODIs in a week, you just spend less time on each performance,
yeah,
which,
yeah,
which doesn't. I don't
yeah.
think that feels right for me. Looking at the two squads, Lauren, Australia have named their squad for the two white ball legs of the series, and they've only named 13 players for the two series. The biggest news is that Sophie Molyneux is out injured. They're not yet going to announce a group for the test just yet. But aside from that, no major surprises. Georgia Vole is included as most likely the spare bat. We still don't know whether or not Alyssa Healy will keep. On Healy, is that a weird thing for her to deal with if you're a keeper skipper 90% of the time and suddenly you're in the outfield?
100%. Like she looks like a duck out of water in the field. I watched the Big Bash game. It's the irony actually, isn't it? It's like she's done a knee fielding when she's a keeper, just trying to still play and get some cricket in, and then she's done a knee fielding for the Sydney Sixers. It's quite ironic, really. But yeah, it's a massive thing. Like I know she's a pretty sort of cool cat and will play things down, but for me, like I know when I've got the gloves on and I'm batting, I feel most at home. I feel like there's less pressure on my batting because I've got another skill to contribute. You've got a great view from captaincy point of view of the feel for just where people are, what the pitch is doing, etc. She's not a terrible fielder, but she's not a gun fielder as well. So it's like you're sort of in these like little, nobody wants to be square leg, nobody wants to be short fine leg. Let's all be real. People want to be, in order of who's good in the field from where you go from being in the ring and behind square. So the other thing is she's pretty short on runs. Like she hasn't played a lot of cricket. She's very short on runs. You've watched, a youngster absolutely gun it against a pretty good Indian side. And like as much as she comes across confident and that obviously they're going to back her in. Like it's human nature to look over your shoulder and go, "Ooh." The way in which Georgia Vole played was pretty impressive on a debut. Like I've never seen anybody look more in control and comfortable and dominant on a debut. I genuinely don't think ever. So you've sort of got that like you're looking over your shoulder a little bit and going, well, I could do with some runs here because there's a lot of people putting their opinions out there about Georgia Vole. As captain, that's important that you're going into big series brimming with confidence, brimming with, your body feels good, your mind feels good, your game's in good order, you've got runs under your belt. And at the minute, she's got none of them. That's just fact is that her body's not in a great place. Otherwise, she'd have been keeping. She's pretty short of runs and she's pretty short of game time. So it's quite difficult as a captain to be then leading, your team into one of the biggest series in the calendar when you consider all those factors.
Mm. And finally, what do you make of the fact that Australia have such a small squad compared to England? I know England are the overseas visiting team, but they both have to travel that much in such a short space of time. And I think John Lewis has specifically talked about how tight the turnarounds are for the seamers and how taking a flight after every game every 2 or 3 days isn't great for recovery. It's not what you'd ideally do. Do you think that is a potential window for England here? Is that England do look like they have really sussed out what the broader conditions of the series are going to be like?
Yeah, I think so. They're giving themselves the best chance. Hey, like they've got a big pool to pick from. They can pick conditions according. They can pick whose GPS looks absolutely chockers and top speed is down. Like like nerdy things like that where you're going, well, like, is Lauren Filer still hitting the same speeds? Is her run up the same speed? Those sorts of things. Okay, well, she might need a rest. Australia, I do think this scheduling is interesting because I do think Australia is struggling injury wise more than England. You've already lost a huge asset in Sophie Molyneux, who they've pretty much, it can't be any clearer that they're sort of not going to go back to Jess Jonathan. Maybe in the test match because she actually got a very good test record, but Be pretty surprised given that they've sort of looked at every other avenue rather than just Jonathan. So she's a huge injury blow. You've got a captain and, your keeper who's not doing her role because she can't physically do it at the minute. Darcy Brown's had injuries in, the WBBL. There's lots of niggles in that Australian camp. England are probably physically in better shape. I know Kate Cross obviously went down with that delivery in South Africa, but that will play a huge part in England have got people that they can rotate and keep fresh throughout the series. They've also probably got a bit more like format players, so you look at like a Danny Gibson, like she's a format player. So if you release her in the T20, she's like a dog with a bone because she's ready to go. That's her format. And then you've got somebody like Kate Cross who is, predominantly more ODIs test match, that sort of, so they've got players that are quite format specific, whereas Australia generally play the same players. You look at somebody like Elise Perry, Annabelle Sutherland, they're going to have some hefty workloads. And they've got a lot of all format players, which is great usually, but not in the context of this real tight schedule. So I do think it is huge and it's going to be difficult, but like you say, it's not optimal physically. Like you speak to any sports scientist, it is absolutely not optimal for players to be. The other thing is you got the heat. Like if you're playing in 35-degree heat, ODI, been baking for 7 hours, and the next day you're on a flight, yeah, and you're playing the following day, like that is no way near optimal. So I do think the fact that England have brought more resources and Australia, are only going in with 13. Yeah, they can fly people in, but you've got the preparation of players have been around the group, of the travel from wherever they are in Australia, all these sorts of things and it just creates a bit more discomfort and uneasy where it's like, who's coming in? What are we going to do? Like, who's it going to be? Whereas England go, well, we've got these here. She's in, she's out. It's pretty seamless and sort of non-dramatic.
Well, it's not very long until it all kicks off. It's only 2 weeks until the first game, and then only 5 weeks until the last game. So yeah, really not long until we see how it all plays out. Well, that's everything for today. Cheers, Lauren, and Happy New Year.
Thanks, Mike. Happy New Year to you too.
Katya, England have announced their squads for the Ashes. Are there any surprises?
Very, very few, if any at all. I think the thing we were all saying that was taken away from it was we could have predicted the exact squads they would pick for every single one. It's pretty much identical to the squads they picked for South Africa, bar a few injury ins and outs. So Danny Gibson's back for the T20Is, although John Lewis in a press conference today said potentially she could make her ODI debut as well if she recovers from, she had knee surgery after the T20 World Cup. Freya Kemp is also back in the T20 squad, I believe, after coming back from having gone home from South Africa, maybe the ODI squad, I can't quite remember.
Yeah, just the T20s.
Just the T20s. Kate Cross also is not quite fit yet, but has still been retained in the test squad. I think the two small takeaways I had from it, apart from Rhiannon McDonald-Gay also retaining her place in the test squad, which felt like a foregone conclusion after she bowled the way she did, was that Alice Capsey has been picked again as a first choice pick, if you like, in the T20 squad, and that Sophia Dunkley has retained her place in the T20 squad. So Capsey obviously was not originally picked for the T20 squad in South Africa, and then when Paige Schofield was injured, was picked back up again. So yeah, she's back, and not quite clear exactly what role she's going to play at the minute. Having said before the South Africa series that her returns in T20 cricket at number 3 hadn't quite been what they'd wanted, or they dipped down. He did say she was probably going to fill that role again if required in the T20 series. And in the ODI series, although she's been kind of sporadic in the ODIs, he said she would bat at number 7 as kind of a spin bowling all-rounder, or they might alternate depending on whether they feel they need a seam bowling all-rounder or a spin bowling all-rounder. And Sophia Dunkley, although she is more than likely the spare bat in that T20 squad, the interesting thing is that Tammy Beaumont hasn't been picked in that T20 squad, given that Beaumont is also in the ODI squad and the Test squad, which sandwiched the T20Is, so she'll be out there for the entire series. And in that ODI innings, I think it was in the final ODI against South Africa, she played a really good innings and showed why she's still a really good option as a T20 batter. She's still not been picked in that T20 squad. So a couple of minor interesting plots to follow or threads to pick at, if not for this series, then just over the course of England's development over the next 12 months or so.
You sat in on the press conference with John Lewis this morning, and there were a few interesting things I thought. So one, the schedule and how it in part explains the size of the group going out there. And two, he's called into question the continued lack of domestic red ball prep available to players. A reminder that even next year with the new county system, there is no provision for red ball cricket. Let's go on the schedule first of all, because I didn't realise that until today, that it's a more compact series compared to the last one.
Yeah, it's all over in 3 weeks, which for basically what is the biggest bilateral series, at least in women's cricket, it seems a bit mad that it's all being crammed into 3 weeks. And when you consider how big Australia is and how big, we were just looking at Australia and thinking, actually, Australia's really huge.
So but hang on, we knew
That's
it was
the kind
big.
of insight you get on this podcast.
We all knew Australia was big before, but what we realised was that even between the cities that sort of look in the same corner, they're still miles away from each other.
Yeah, exactly. Not the biggest takeaway there. Continent is huge. But yeah, in the Ashes series in 2023, it was pretty spaced out in terms of how these series can be. So after the test happened first, there was then a 5-day break before the T20 series, and then there was only one time where the gap was 2 days in between the white ball matches, and that was going from Southampton to Taunton, which is not the biggest journey ever. Whereas this time around, there's a couple of matches where the turnaround is only 2 days, and there's actually pretty significant distances to travel. So after the first ODI in Sydney, there'll be a 2-day gap, and then they'll be in Melbourne for the second ODI. And even after the ODI, after that, there's only a 3-day gap, and then another 3-day gap before the T20 series starts, and then another 3-day gap, and then a 2-day gap. So the biggest gap you're getting in the white ball series is 3 days. And the final 2-day gap is then Canberra to Adelaide, which is also not an insignificant distance. And the other thing that schedule means, because the test has been flipped around and is now at the end, there's now no time for a red ball warm-up match in between the white ball series and the red ball series. But
so Lewis is worried about turnaround times,
Yeah.
particularly with bowlers recovering and lots of time spent travelling, basically.
Yeah, so that was the explaining why the group is so big and why the amount of seam bowlers or seam bowling all-rounders they're taking is more than you would usually expect, because it's not best practice to have a bowler who's bowled 10 overs in a match then get on a plane and play again the day after they've got on a plane after playing. I know you saw that, I think, in the men's series over the men's Australia series recently against Pakistan as well, that they talked about the standards for fast bowlers going on planes after bowling and white ball matches, and why some of their bigger players were rested for parts of that series. So with Kate Cross having her kind of back spasm, you're putting a lot of pressure on quite young fast bowlers like Lauren Bell and Lauren Filer to be fit for the entirety of the series, because otherwise you're quite quickly going into your depths of reserves on the pace bowler front. So that's the issue with the scheduling. And also that the test is at the end, which has multiple kind of meanings on the series.
Well, over to you, Ben, for the permutations around that. What do you think of having the test match at the end? That's the big change from 2023, test match at the start. Same number of games overall. The point system is the same, but the marquee test match end rather than start. Thoughts?
Yeah, I guess the one fear you have with the test at the end is that you will go into it with one team knowing they only need to draw to secure their desired result. So if one team, if it's 2-1 in the T20s and 2-1 in the ODIs, Australia will know, so that's to 2-1 to one team, 2-1 to the other team, Australia will know they need to draw, Ashes retained. If it's 2-1 to England in both, then they know draw, they've won the series. And so you're going to have one team that might have to, sometimes you just get teams that just want to play ball and have a good test match. But I think the Ashes is so important, as it should be, that you might have you will get one team that will have to just do all the running to get their result, because they'll be sort of, from a series point of view, no incentive for the other team to go and win it. And that is different when this test is either in the middle or at the start.
So is it that there's actually only one scenario in which... is there any scenario where one team is not in their interest to just draw the game?
Well, no, because
England are either in front or they're not.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
So it will always be beneficial for one team to draw
that's
the game.
really rubbish.
Yeah. And that is a worry, I think, that, and I don't think Australia would just suddenly, especially if they get ahead of steam in the ODIs and then all of a sudden lose the T20s, and then they're like, oh, we're panic station's a bit, let's roll out a flat one in the MCG, and then go out and make 600 in 2.5 days, and that's the Ashes secured. I mean, that's a bit too extreme, but that is the fear, basically, is that it's almost like you see in the men's Ranji Trophy sometimes, when games are decided by first innings lead, so you get these games that are just like complete sort of run fest, because there is no incentive to win it for one team, and you worry about that. So I think it is so tricky to work out what the best schedule is, because you had in the last Ashes series, although England obviously made a good fist of it in the white ball stuff, Australia had just got so far ahead by winning that first game that it meant that there was so little margin for error for England after that point. So you kind of feel from a competitiveness point of view, if it was in the middle, like if it was the middle sort of series or the middle format, that makes the most sense. But then it's the weirdest to kind of be switching to test mode, and then from test mode is not ideal from like a playing point of view. I also,
but this isn't ideal because, as Katya said,
well,
there's no warm up. Whereas in 2023, both sides played a warm up game.
Yeah, I guess there's several things with the schedule. I think the lack of I think you could quite easily just add another week into this series. Basically, just put an extra day in between every game, and then also have time for a 2-day pink ball game against an Australia A side or something. That would seem quite a lot better. But yeah,
and it's quite interesting that the format for the Women's Ashes is actually really quite similar to what it has been for a while, despite the women's game being very different to what it has been actually in the quite recent past. And maybe it's just a case of broadcast deals are signed and sorted so far in advance that actually boards have minimal wriggle room to change things up. But it does feel like maybe the format should be changing in the near future. Maybe either having 2 tests both in the middle, or having a longer white ball series, longer ODI or longer T20I series. Because it doesn't feel right that the test matches at the end and one team is guaranteed to want a draw, basically.
Yeah, it's worth saying on that as well that the test match this time is going to be a 4-day game. So in England last time it was a 5-day game, and it did go into that 5th day and there was a result. I know we've just seen a 3-day test in South Africa.
But that was such a good test match, even though that even though Australia's winning margin at the end was decent. It was a great game all the way through.
Yeah, but I guess it's easier to secure, if you're looking for it or only a draw will do, it's easier to secure a draw in a 4-day game than it is if it was going to 5 days. So that's also something to think about. It'll also be played with a pink ball, so that's another point of difference in this test. But I've said before, I'm a big fan of like points format multi-series tours. I think as many women's series as possible should be under this kind of format. But in terms of the Ashes and in terms of the scale of how fast women's cricket has developed, I do think there is room to be a bit more inventive in the way they play it, or the way they organise the points or something like that. I personally thought after the 2023 series there should be 2 test matches in this series. It's the Ashes, it's the biggest bilateral women's series that there is. What's the point in just kind of bunging a test match on the end of it and having a T20 that is worth half the points of a test match if you win it? And if you add another test match into it, it doesn't only give increased relevance to test cricket, but it actually keeps the series alive for longer, because if you won the one test match, there's no guarantee that you then win the series. Whereas before, even if you got the test at first, if you won that series pretty much over, as we saw in 2023, and then if you've got the test coming, then it's kind of another kind of, whoever wins that test is probably going to win the series.
And there's also the danger, and this is always the case with the multi-format series, of the series being over and done with quite a lot of cricket left over. In the past, that was skewed one way because the test match was at the start, but there's actually a very real possibility, Ben, that the tour is completely done before the test match.
Yeah, but then I guess that's a time-honoured tradition for England and Australia to get into the last couple of weeks, not have loads to play for.
England getting to Melbourne with a series on the line is something that neither the men or women have done in quite a long time.
Yes, yeah. So yeah, what was I going to say? Yeah, I guess, I agree with Katya that 2 tests would be fun. It'd be interesting to think about how you would do them. Like, would you bookend the tour, or would you just have the 2 tests in a row? Like you used to get, it's actually quite a new thing to just have
Yeah.
Series split into formats like that. And obviously that makes more sense in men's cricket, where the formats are quite separate between the two. But actually, you look at the squads, and there's not loads of turnover between.
But in men's cricket 20 years ago, it was actually very, very normal to go, let's play a few tests, let's play a few ODIs, let's play a few tests, play a few ODIs, ship in a different team for one section of the ODI tri-series.
Different coaching staff.
Yeah, exactly.
It had a nice rhythm to it. But I guess there's also, and this is we're just talking about the Ashes. This isn't the time to talk about this, but like, what is the vision for women's Test cricket generally, I guess, and this comes into what John Lewis was saying about wanting domestic multi-day games, and that again, that's something that should be very feasible, because they do it. I know the men are always complain about how much cricket they play, but we're not saying you need to play 14 4-day games to have like some real valuable prep for the women's side. You just need to just have a few, and you'd be in a much better position. And then equally, like, there is clearly a drive to just play more women's cricket in general, because there are being more played, and this, I feel like this must be coming from the players first and foremost. But as with basically everything in cricket, there is no one who is willing to just have the thing to sit down and say, okay, what do we want this whole thing to look as a whole package? Like, what number of tests do we need? Who needs to play whom to make a really attractive 4-year cycle. Instead, it's just the ICC get people together, they look at what stuff's already been agreed, then put it in a spreadsheet and say, look, we've done a future tours program. I think that and that would be what fits into it. Like, we want to see test series, not just test matches, and we would like to have kind of some context to all of these things. But at the moment, it just feels a bit like ticking along with what we've done before and putting in a few extra games to almost appease the players, rather than because they want to fit it into a cohesive whole, I guess.
But the issue is that everyone has a different view for what they want the future of Test cricket to be in the women's game, right? So the ICC have one view. Boards can't agree between themselves whether they want to play Test cricket or not. The players want to play Test cricket. You've got Bangladesh now who don't play Test cricket, having a Red Bull first class competition. India do play Test cricket and do have a Red Bull first class competition. So the issue is the lack of cohesiveness, rather than that no one is sitting down and saying it. I think people do know what they want for the future of it, but they all have different views on what it should be. And it's also worth saying just exactly what John Lewis said in the press conference. He said every time you play Test cricket, it should be underpinned by multi-day cricket at domestic level. If you're doing it at senior international level, there should be some way that the players are able to understand how to play. And I think there's space for it in the domestic calendar. I know the domestic calendar are obviously changing next year, but it's not a ridiculously packed schedule on the domestic calendar. The international schedule is over, and the 100 has that window, but there is space for more stuff in the women's domestic calendar, even though it's changing. And it's in terms of so Lauren Filer and Rhiannon McDonald-Gay, for example, haven't played much Test cricket, but someone like Heather Knight has now played quite a lot of Test cricket, and you can really see that she looks like she knows what she's doing in the format now, whereas that's not true for the players who haven't played any form of Test cricket. And with the pink ball being used for this Ashes Test as well, that's a whole nother layer that you add into it, that you're bowling with a red ball and you think you know how to do it, and then you get to bowl with a pink ball and you're like, oh, this is completely different. So there just seems like there's so many underlying threads and issues that no one is willing to have an almost sit down collaborative meeting and unpick, how do we do this? If this is what the players want, how do we accommodate that? If this is what the board wants, how do we accommodate that? And actually bring people together over it, which is the issue with a lot of things.
I think it's very interesting that in the last week, you've had both the England captain and head coach basically talk in an exasperated tone about how Test cricket is treated. It's not that usual for an England head coach to be so outwardly critical at what is effectively an ECB event, right? The unveiling of an Ashes squad, about something that is obviously ECB relevant, the domestic structure. Last week, Heather Knight spoke about basically being shocked at finding out there was no DRS for the test against South Africa. So yeah, it does feel like women's Test cricket is in quite a weird place, because it did feel, Ben, not that long ago, that it was dying. That basically no one other than England and Australia played it. There was a 5-year period where I think there was only one Test match, and we're improving the number of Test matches, but the stuff around it's not quite there at the moment.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I'm more hopeful for it, especially now that Future Tours program was great when it came out, and also the Bangladesh news is really cool, basically. And actually, so I think you then have the look of what, is that 6 countries or is it 5? yes, 6 countries who are like have made some sort of designs towards playing Test cricket. And I kind of think, I reckon New Zealand could have their arm twisted. I know that, like, because that's the one like proper top tier team who, you know, are resisting. But I think, you know, if they had incentive to do it, they would do it because they have made it such a financial decision not to, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty hopeful for it. But and obviously, yeah, teams will have different things that they want from it. But I do think that actually, especially because, you know, almost because it's in some ways because it's less the pinnacle in women's cricket, because, you know, they've played it less, that actually makes like an all format point system global league table something that almost feels feasible. Like, wouldn't it be amazing if you had like a whole structure that was, you know, 2 tests, 3 ODIs, 3 T20Is, all of that feeds into a global league, and that decides everything. That would make like every tour like a big event, and you would know exactly what you're getting from each tour, and you know, you would have like all this context. I mean, it's quite a pipe dream, but you know, this new feature program goes until what, 2029, so we've got 5 years to get it going. So I reckon let's get it sorted.
And just on that history, so between November 2014 and June 2021, so 6.5 years, only England and Australia play test matches, whereas now, as you say, there are 6 teams who are at least making the right noises about playing more test cricket in the near future. Elsewhere, India comprehensively beat West Indies 3-0 in the ODIs between the two sides. Deepti Sharma took a 6-for in the third game. Harleen Jol scored her first international 100 in the second game, and Smriti Mandana continued her excellent recent form in the first. We'll be doing a bit of a deep dive into where India are at more generally at the moment on next week's show. But before then, that is it for today. Thank you, Lauren, Katya and Ben. And another huge thank you and well done to the 38 winners of the Metro Bank Champion of Girls Cricket in 2024. The work you do to transform the game for girls is incredible. If you want to find out more about the fund, head to metrobankonline.co.uk/cricket.